everyone, welcome to the Jeff Bullish Show. Today with me, Ryan Estes. Now, Ryan is an American Buddhist entrepreneur. I found that fascinating right off the bat when I read that, and we're going to talk more about that. He's the co-founder of Kitcaster, a podcast booking agency, and he's sent a few guests to us already, and the co-founder of Wildcast, a SaaS advertising platform for podcasts. Ryan facilitates thousands of extraordinary conversations, and we're going to have one of those right here today. Kitcaster currently serves 400 plus clients, and Wildcast is slated for a beta launch in Q3 2022. Ryan is an expert in leveraging podcasts for meaning and profitability. So what we're going to do today is we're going to dive a little bit more into how to make your podcast sing and dance, and also some of the X factors behind successful podcasters. Ryan's a passionate founder, and prior to Kitcaster, he owned a media and marketing agency for 10 years. For 8 of those years, he hosted the Founders Podcast Talk Launch. He consistently ranked on iTunes Top 100 Podcasts. He's recorded 300 plus interviews. Hasn't done anything basically then for 10 years except talk to people. No, I'm joking. And he's had more than 250,000 downloads, and he's married with 2 kiddos in Denver, Colorado. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Jeff, I really appreciate it. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Now, if you hear Ryan's voice, you're going, well, he could maybe be a singer, or he could be in a band or in the music industry. Now, we're going to go back a little bit to where Ryan's previous life, I think it was a previous life a long time ago. So, Ryan, tell us that you went and did music industry studies at the University of Denver, Colorado. So let's go back to that before we leap into and discover what some of the inspiration in your life along the way, and what got you into music studies at the university.
Yeah, I wanted to be a rock star, when I was a kid, and I got to live that dream a little bit, minus the star part. So, I looked at music curriculum, and there was an audio engineering program, and there was a music business studies program at CU Denver. That was back when there was a music industry. And so I had a great time kind of learning the logistics of contract negotiation, things like that, with the intention of building my own record label, which I did to self-release 3 albums, a couple of mixtapes. As a performing recording artist, the fruition of my music career was I became the music director for a jazz flavored restaurant called Dazzle here in Denver, that basically I had the pleasure of turning into one of the world's best jazz clubs, as rated by Downbeat magazine. This was many, many, many years ago. Okay. But it does play into like how podcasting came into my life, So managed a jazz club for years, had a great time doing it. I continued to record and perform and kind of do the starving artist thing until I had 2 small children, and being a rock star minus the star part is not necessarily the fulcrum of commerce, if you know what I mean. So I was getting side-eyed from my wife and ended up kind of hanging my hat on the music business. So as a result of that, this might have been 2009, maybe 2008, 2009. And I took a square job and had this gigantic commute in my car. And when I quit music, I didn't just stop doing it. Like, I quit in a tantrum. I threw a fit. I put all my stuff away. I was done. I quit music. I quit listening to music. I was so over it and heartbroken, Jeff. It was terrible. Right. So right about this time, I hear about podcasting. I had an iPhone 2 and basically would download podcasts for my commute to my new job. And one thing I found about this podcast is that it was really hard, quitting my identity and life as a musician. It was really hard having 2 young children and starting a new job. Kind of, maybe picking the shattered dreams off the floor, as it were, and moving on. And what I really found is that podcasting was this thing that kind of held me for a minute and like gave me something to do with with my attention,
Yep.
particularly in these car rides. So as a result of that, I was like, I grabbed my band buddies and was like, "Hey, let's do a podcast." They're like, "What's that?" I was like, "It's just like band practice minus the music, the fun stuff." Just sitting around talking trash to each other. So I started doing that, and I never looked back. I started recording podcasts from then on out.
Cool. So you threw your toys out of the cot, obviously, on the music industry.
I did. It was terrible. It culminated in this concert that we did. It was for the Wounded Warrior Fund, which my family is a large Marine family, a lot of Marines in my family, and so wanted to do something to give back. And we had negotiated an 80-20 split with the door. Well, fast forward, we've sold out the night, and it's 4 a.m. I'm looking to get paid, and they wanted to pay out a 20-80 split. And I was like, oh, no, no, no. I have an agreement that says 80-20 split. And basically they just told me, we don't care about the contract. We're paying you 20%. And so, I kind of embarrassed, but I tossed a couple tables, maybe threw a couple beers, had to be drug out of there. And that was it. I was like, I'm done. I can't handle a business that doesn't respect agreements. Um,
Wow.
I was much younger. It was very dramatic, but it was terrible. It was bad. I ended up, funding the the Wounded Warriors out of my own pocket because it was important that they got paid, and we had a great, wonderful night. It was very typical of the way I'd always been treated in the music business.
Mm.
That's If I was to teach a course now in music industry studies, I'd just lead with that story. So
Yeah. In other words, just keep playing in your dungeon at home and just
yeah, exactly. Don't trust anybody.
yeah.
Just it's some cautionary, horrible tale. No, I think it's probably better now. But clubbing musicians, if you're out there and listening, I'm sure you can relate to those stories.
Yeah. So you've had an existential crisis. You've discovered podcasting, and so let's fast forward. So how did Kitcaster start, and what are the principles behind that? Because you mentioned before we kicked off, was that you started using some of the principles of Buddhism as part of the inspiration for Kitcaster. Tell us about how Kitcaster started and the principles behind it.
Absolutely. So Kitcaster is I'm a co-founder of Kitcaster, and we're a podcast booking agency, which you explained at the top of the show. So really, we work with entrepreneurs that want to go on other people's show, just like this one. So this came about basically as a result of my podcasting. I was introduced to a lot of people, which is one of the best things about podcasting is if you're a people person, it's a person magnet. It's great. One of those people was Brandy Whalen, who is our co-founder at Kitcaster, and is just an extraordinary person. And she and I always had a really easy rapport and just kind of clicked, as colleagues, as friends. And we were getting breakfast one morning, and she's like, Ryan, we should do a project together. And I was like, absolutely, let's do it. What should we do? We're kind of like, let's figure out something in podcasting, because that's how we had met. So we kind of put a pilot program together for a podcast booking agency and had some real success right out of the gate. Um, so we are like, okay, well, hey, let's wrap a brand around this service and do it the right way. Well, around this time too, and this is probably maybe 4 years ago, I'd been doing some pretty intensive studies in Buddhism. I consider myself an American Buddhist, which I know for some folks that are not necessarily religiously disposed, any kind of mention of that might be a little cringy, which I'm respectful for. But also, I've allowed myself maybe my own personal cringe to really kind of go into what it means to be an American Buddhist, and what it means to me. So within my studies, there's a principle in Buddhism which is called right livelihood, which is there's certain kind of do's and don'ts, if you will, morality wise, of how you would create a business. Some of these are very clear within the Buddhist structure, which is like you can't, you can't buy and sell weapons. You can't buy and sell intoxicants, certain things like that, where it's like, oh, that's pretty cut or dry. I don't think I'm going to get into arms dealing anytime soon. Um, but then there's some kind of like more squishy areas of like, what does right livelihood mean? What does it mean to create a business in an ethically positive way for clients, for your staff, for in this case, for the podcasters that we work with? What does it mean to have right livelihood in a largely digital medium? Most of the work we do is on
Yep.
on emails. um, and then what does the brand in the business kind of imbibe in, if not a spiritual sense, in a moral ethical sense? Like, what does it mean to have right livelihood and project that? Because we want that kind of essence to attract the kind of clients we'd like to work with. So all those questions early on were really what shaped the business, and kind of what brought it to where it is now.
Right. So yeah, so for me, I almost see Buddhism not as a religion. I see it as more a spiritual path journey. That's how I see it. I certainly reading a book on the Tao at the moment. In fact, by 𝓲𝓪𝓻𝓷. So it's certainly for me. It's I think it's. I used to be extremely religious. I was brought up in a fundamentalist Christian family. Very good, health and oriented, family oriented. So it was healthy. But I left that behind when I was 27. So, but still have been on a spiritual path ever since, frankly. So it's interesting that you've used that as a guiding light, I suppose, for what you're doing with Kitcaster. So with Kitcaster, did you see that people were having trouble attracting guests? What was there a problem that you were trying to solve?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the problem I saw largely was with um, entrepreneurs. Okay, I'll just put it this way. As an entrepreneur myself, I get so excited. I want to tell everybody about what I'm working on. And now no one of my friends or family ever wants to hear what I have to say again. I just I just gave them vicious ear beatings. They're like, dude, what happened to the cookie SMS project? I'm like, oh, it's over, but I got a new thing now. And they're like, oh, please don't tell me about it. So if you're a creator, a creative person, you need feedback, but like you run out of like runway pretty quick as
Run
far
out,
as like friend.
you run out of ears.
Yeah, exactly. People are like, dude, I don't want to hear about this, man. And you're like, no, come on, please. I'm so excited. So that was really the problem that I saw, is that like creative people, entrepreneurs, businessmen, businesswomen, they need an audience. They need a little bit of friction. So they need something to like play with in order to get their ideas, fully validated.
Yep.
And so, I really thought from the beginning, like, hey, podcasting is going to scratch this itch for them, and also there's like a wealth of wonderful podcasts that are, that see the equation of like, I'm going to trade my audience and what I've built for your expertise. And there's something beautiful in that, because it's just generally a handshake. Like, hey, thanks so much. I need someone to talk to, and you need someone to listen. So let's get into this. And from a Buddhist perspective, also, that felt very balanced and fair. There's some kind of like there's a synchronicity that was happening in there, and a bit of a spiritual magic. I'll pick up where you were talking about the Buddhism stuff a little bit too, because I think you made an important differentiation and kind of talking about it as like a spiritual path, which I and not a religious one. And it's interesting. And I think this is kind of a component of the American Buddhist tradition, because, I was taught very early on that like Buddhism isn't something you believe, it's something you do.
Mm-hmm.
It's a practice that you're involved in. And so, but now, so the practice of Buddhism is the central component to the American tradition. But in Buddhist nations and, these countries that have had Buddhism as a central pillar in their lives for 2,500 years, only about 4 or 5% of those people have any kind of contemplative practice or meditation.
Mm-hmm.
They have a 95% of people that are like, lighting incense and praying to Buddha or to different pantheon of different spiritual images. where it is much more religious in practice. And I don't think there's particularly anything wrong with that at all. I think it's wonderful, and there's different things for different folks. But also, like, because we live in this information age, all of the monks came off the hills and they told all their secrets to folks like us, you know? So what's interesting is that there does seem to be a differentiation of Buddhism as a religion, spiritual practice. And also there's a large number of secular Buddhists where they're total atheists. And yet they still claim to be Buddhist. So you know, I would never be disrespectful to people that do have the religiosity of it, and there's a certain amount of that resonates with me, but rather it's the actual practice that I think ultimately is what differentiates me from other kind of schisms of Buddhism.
Okay.
To kind of pull back a little bit, but
Yeah. Now, it's fascinating. I had a very honest conversation with my father at the age of 27 when I left organized religion behind. And what I remember the conversation I had with him, and it was quite confronting because at the age of 27, I was still constrained by the way I'd been brought up.
yeah,
But some crises had happened in my life, and what was interesting was I sort of felt that there was a much bigger world out there, beyond the constraints of the rules and regulations that usually wrap most religions. And I remember the phrase I said to Dad. I said, the God I've discovered is much bigger than the God I grew up with.
mm,
And that's more a spiritual journey that's open to the world and to, I think, almost what I call the super conscious, which is a word that's been used by 𝓲𝓬𝓪𝓻𝓷 in the past. But that was what I said to my dad, in that I just thought that the God that I'd grown up with was just too small.
yeah.
So anyway, that was my aha moment, and conversation where I moved on.
Yeah, I had something very similar. You know, I'm also very grateful that I was raised in a Christian tradition,
Yeah,
largely because those archetypes are echoed through our culture in so many pervasive ways that it
yep,
gives you a certain understanding of the cultural norms and myths that exist everywhere, particularly in art and literature and music and everything else. So I'm very grateful that for that. But also I found it similarly unacceptable in my worldview for some kind of fundamental um, belief
mm,
structure, which is
yep,
also, I think, really what spoke to me about contemplative practice is that, you know, if I have to learn some words and I have to learn how when you move your lips a certain way and it vibrates and it gets into my ears and I have to believe that some way, it seems like a lot of work,
yep,
you know.
yeah, exactly.
It seems like that's um it's it's just like I could think about it, but then when I started having direct experience, another important differentiation about American Buddhism is, if we're honest about it, the origin of American Buddhism is rooted in the psychedelic movements of the 50s and 60s,
Yeah,
that people were taking acid and like having revelatory non-normative conscious experiences and needing to find some kind of ballast, needing to find some kind of map of the terrain that they had just found. And lo and behold, they had a 2,500-year-old
yeah,
practice where they're like, oh no, we understand exactly what your experience was. Like, this is direct experience.
yes.
So it kind of knocked off the alphabet systems of, like,
The Ten
divine
Commandments.
scriptures.
Yeah,
Yeah, where
yeah,
you're like, dude, I don't have to read anything. If you take LSD at a certain dosage, like, you're going to have, a mystical experience.
yeah, for
So particularly now, one conversation I'm really interested in having too with the Buddhist community is that not only are we seeing a new renaissance in the psychedelic community, but we're having the psychedelics mix with market-based commerce, and it's happening right now in Oregon. It's about to happen here in Denver, Colorado,
yep,
where basically not only are they decriminalizing and legalizing, but they're creating industries for people to have mystical experiences on demand in, like, care centers and
yeah,
retreat centers, and they're going to be run by amateurs. And so there's kind of a dire need right now, I think, for people to at least be open to some of these like the literature that you're reading, you know, where it has a bit of stabilizing integral structure to what's going to become like a lot of people blowing their minds on psychedelic drugs, to totally take a random tangent there.
Yeah, well, and I sort of, I've wrapped that study too over the years, sort of a spiritual study, but not deep study. It's more an interest, and I meditate every day, and I just find a way to basically calm the mind so you can be much more in the now.
Yeah.
If you got, and especially in a noisy world in which you live, the digital world is just so noisy and crowded. You need to find some quiet amongst that noise, because inspiration can't be heard. Small voices of inspiration can't be heard if there's so much noise, and that's part of it's just quite pragmatic, but also spiritual. One of the best things I've ever viewed is a 6-series video recorded in the 80s with Joseph Campbell called The Power of Myth.
The
It,
best.
it is so good. And Joseph Campbell was brought up a very strict Catholic, but he left that behind when he discovered that humanity was all connected spiritually through myth, and he thought that was much more powerful. So he continued to study that over his entire life. I'm a bit of a Joseph Campbell fanboy. I love his story arc.
Me too.
Yeah,
He's fantastic.
yeah. So he passed away about a year or two after he did that video recording. But anyway, we digress. So Kitcaster started. You saw a need, people needing guests that, and I like that too in terms of the podcasters and giving an audience, providing an audience for the guest, and the term I like to use is the Oprah effect. In other words, shine the light on the guest. So I remembered that, and that's what I try and do is when I sit down for a chat is to do a lot more listening than talking. So Kitcaster starts. It gets traction pretty well straight away. How did you get your first clients? How did that look?
So, from the bio you read, which was so gracious, I had a media and marketing company that was largely kind of leveraged in food and beverage and hospitality.
Yep.
But I'd worked with a bunch of different people over the years. And so first, when I'm launching a new product, I'll kind of stay central to kind of a bullseye, and go to the people closest to me that I can count on to support me no matter what.
Yep.
So I went to 3 folks that were also good of mine. Think about doing this booking agency. What do you think? And they're like, dude, that's a great idea. You should definitely do it. I was like, will you pay for it? They're like, how much? I said, $3,500. They said, yeah. And I took their money that day. So that's how I knew, kind of passed the first validation that like three of my friends would pay for it, just sight unseen. Like, I'll do it. Let's go. So I was like, okay, then the next day I called a couple other folks that were clients, but not kind of as friendly. These are folks that are, interested in new opportunities, but they're not just going to jump on anything. And out of those 5 calls, I closed 2 of them. 2 of those people were like, yes, to the point where I'm like, will you pay me $3,500 right now? And they're like, yes. So kind of out of the gate, we had 5 clients to run this pilot program.
Right.
So from there, I moved from clients, and then I start cold outreach and say like, okay, I need to speak with people that have no idea who I am, what I am. Can I sell this thing? And I started validating that way. And again, had great success, going out there and getting it done. So it became then, okay, can I teach somebody else how to sell this? And then yes, we could. So we grew very quickly, we kick off there was 3 of us at the time and part-time guy in Kitcaster, and our official kickoff launch, which is September of 2019. And I had kind of eyeballed, okay, Kitcaster, I'm going to come over and do this full time in March-ish, because it was still kind of a side thing for both Brandy and I's business. So we get to March 2020, and of course, pandemic shuts everything down. On my agency side, we had basically lost our entire book of business. It was more than 15 clients because they were all restaurants and, really nice
Right.
hotels. So we got kicked to the curb immediately. And I kind of looked at my wife and was like, well, let's see if this podcasting thing works. Otherwise, I'm going to go drive delivery trucks for Amazon for a little while. Um, and it did. It took off very, very quickly. From March 2020 until now. We now have a team of 25. Employees of the company, and we're still growing. We have 3 AEs with quota, so everyone has a number, and we're moving really quickly. So it's been a really fun and incredible journey. And it's the business success is one thing, but to be able to do it with podcasting is something that I love so much, that has meant so much to me over the years, and something that I'd kind of been like, oh well, podcasting, everybody knows about that. But it turns out that podcasting grew in popularity 30-40% during the pandemic.
Yeah.
So it's kind of provided an opportunity for me to lead and to provide jobs for a bunch of really cool people, but also to put bread on my plate, which has been wonderful.
That's great. That's a great success story, and it's fantastic. So you've got the guest side. You want looking for attention. So on the host side, how do you go about that?
The host side of, so once we have a client, like, how do we find the hosts?
Yep. Yes, exactly.
Cold email. Cold email. So where we spend a lot of time with our agents, and we have, I think probably 15, 16, 17 podcast agents who have maybe, let's say, 10 clients. And what they're doing is they're looking at the attributes and outcomes for the client's audience. So what are the outcomes? A lot of times we're working with startups, particularly right now, that are looking for fundraising opportunities. Whether it's a seed round, maybe it's ABC round, usually A, but they're looking for venture capitalists and angel investors.
Yep.
So the outcome is we want to raise money. So not only are we going to then approach podcast hosts that give an opportunity to tell their story, but also potentially podcasts that have venture capitalists in the audience that gives them opportunity perhaps to close a round. Maybe it's the podcast host himself that will help them. So that's just one example. So what we do is we take the time to figure out what are the outcomes that those clients want, and then we go find the podcast and then essentially pitch the conversation they'd like to have. So Jeff, if you're a a client, we don't necessarily want to talk about your products to podcast host. Rather, we'd like to talk about the conversation that you would like to have, because then it feels much more reciprocal to what podcasting really is. It's not a 60-minute commercial. It's a great conversation. So the people that we hide are essentially like scouts, and they're scouring Apple Podcasts for the best possible podcast opportunities for their clients.
Right. So how do you determine which is going to be the best podcast? And there's no best, but what's going to be a good one, maybe? Or are you are you doing data searches as well? Target audience, I suppose. What are some of the elements that you're seeking when you're doing an Apple podcast search, for example? Obviously, you're looking at categories.
Yeah, you bet. It's definitely a science and an art, because as you well know, there is not a lot of audience data in podcasting.
No.
There's basically almost none. A lot of folks are out there trying to figure that out, and I hope they do. I hope they get it. Yeah. So what we do is we have to kind of do it old school, which is read the liner notes, see what guests are on there. We use a couple of different tools. We'll look at what's the chart, the charting, so the top 100 podcasts per category is a great place to start. Yep. But determining, two factors that are the most important, what's the reach? We definitely want a podcast that is reaching a good amount of people, fair amount of people. But the most important thing really is the relevance. Is like, if you can match perfectly the host, audience, and the guest, then you have absolutely magical outcomes for the guest. because that's when people connect to that person, product, service, whatever it is, and they want to take some next steps. So determining that relevance is kind of the artistry of this, really getting into the client or the guest's story and understanding like how they'll be able to deliver on a certain podcast. And then there's going to be a lot of intangibles, what's the chemistry between the host and the guest? Can the guest talk? Sometimes that can be a challenge, and we have services for that, which is, it can be a little bit nerve-wracking going on shows and telling your story, and you get caught flat-footed and get a tough question you don't know how to answer. So we do a little bit of what we call story crafting with our clients, which is helping them pull out the anecdotes from their past that will help kind of endear them to audiences and hopefully kind of take the edge off of the nerves a little bit.
Cool. Yeah, it's the data on podcasting is like a black box, really. It's and Apple's maybe the main culprit behind that.
Yeah, they're losing so much market share too.
Yeah,
it's wild to see Spotify just come in and just like almost steamroll them at this point.
Yeah, I haven't had to look at the data in comparison between those two, but one of the reasons we started a YouTube channel for the 𝓵𝓵𝓵 Show as well is that I've got better metrics for the video. So yeah,
YouTube is great. Everybody can see everything. It's awesome.
Yeah. And also the other thing too about is what I love about a podcast is recording it is that you create 3 different type of media. You get a transcript that's text, you do the audio, which is the podcast itself on iTunes or Spotify, and then you've got the video you can put on your YouTube channel. So that was very much part of our strategy, was to make sure that we could do 3 different media and then carve it up into small pieces that we can share in snippet form. So yeah, it's really, and I think podcasting has gone, it's got a long way to go. We're really at the start of and overnight success, like Rogan, like he started like 14, 15 years ago, and his first podcasts were horrific. So if you go
Some of his most recent stuff is horrific as well.
Yeah, but he's got attention. But I think part of the game is controversial.
Yeah, no, I love Rogan. I give Rogan a hard time, but he's definitely had his share of controversy. But yeah, I totally agree. I'm very bullish, obviously, in podcasting, and particularly you start looking internationally, like markets outside the United States really haven't even started podcasting yet.
Yeah,
so it's very interesting to see how it proceeds, and it really it comes from this fun kind of guerrilla radio, Wild West type atmosphere, and I hope it retains a little bit of that wildness.
It's nothing like a bit of Wild West at the start of a new industry. Social media was the Wild West when it started back in the early 2000s, and
it was so fun.
It was wonderful. I remember I caught up with a couple of colleagues, one from Australia the other day, Brian Solis from America, and we were right there at the start of the social media revolution, and we talked about the good old days.
Yeah.
And it was so, and I think podcasting around quite a while, but it's hitting its straps. I'm in Australia, obviously. Well, maybe not obviously, because you can't see the Sydney Harbour Bridge, but podcasting here is certainly getting a lot of traction on radio stations. All do podcasts. There's agencies over here as well, and so now, other thing that popped into my mind was, okay, you've launched a new SaaS advertising platform for podcasters, which is called Wildcast. Can you tell us about that and how that inspiration started?
Absolutely. And the Wildcast beta is going to start in probably about 6 weeks from now. We're sitting in pretty much mid-August. If you go to Wildcast now, it's basically a guest matching platform, but we're transitioning and transforming the platform into a podcast advertising platform. Because of the work that we've done with the agency and really figured out that relevancy is key. we think we're in a unique place to create the world's best podcast advertising platform. And that's largely because podcast advertising now is done from a CPM model, which means that people or advertisers will pay podcast hosts per 1,000 downloads. So if you had a $10 CPM for every 1,000 people that download your show, they'll pay you $10. Okay. And what you and I know at is that audience size can vary dramatically from show to show, from month to month. And also the quality of attention in podcasting is worth paying attention to. It's worth paying attention to paying attention. Is that what I just said?
That'll do.
That it's not going to work in transcription, but somehow in podcasting it works. Which is to say, if you've got Rogan on, let's say, and he's got a guest that you're not really interested in, you're probably paying attention with about 50% of your attention. You're just kind of like, it's kind of rolling in the back, and he's going to talk for 3 hours, and it's like you're hanging out with an old buddy. Whereas if you're looking in listening to a podcast that's solving problems that you're having right now, you're going to give higher quality attention to that show. Now, what we found is that podcasts that solve problems, maybe like this podcast, where you're speaking and giving very helpful tasks, tips, encouragement to entrepreneurs, people that are working on side hustles, things like that, that people are listening to get something out of this show. So the quality of their attention is more valuable. Now, the difference is Rogan show, biggest show in the world, it has millions and millions of monthly downloads. It's an entertainment show.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know what ads are on his show because I just skip them every single time.
I do the same.
Whereas with a podcast that's, no disrespect, Jeff, but you're smaller than Joe Rogan.
Really?
Even though it's a smaller in number size, the quality of the audience is better. So we're creating a platform that can capitalize on the audiences that aren't necessarily an entertainment-based podcast. Rather, it's business, tech, B2B, SaaS type podcasts where they can really capitalize on the quality of attention that they're getting from their audience.
Yeah.
So that's coming in beta in about 6 weeks. We're really excited to, be working with the podcast community, which has been so good to us, of course, but also like bringing in brands and agencies of people that understand podcast is ubiquitous enough that like we need to get our message out there. And not only do we want to get our message out there, but we need to corner our entire category, which is something you can do by targeting B2B and tech podcasts.
Yeah. Yeah, we certainly do target, and software as a service type companies are certainly more of just startups are. I just love part of the conversations I have with founders and startups is I'm just constantly amazed by the creativity that the entrepreneurs brought to the table to solve a problem. And I'm going, wow, okay, you're solving that, and that is a problem. For example, one was a platform that helped people stop spending money on monthly SaaS products because they're no longer using it, and it's hidden in the mist and noise of a credit card or a company accounting department. And they're identifying on average $250,000 savings by getting rid of subscription products that are not being used by the company.
Yeah.
And I went, wow. So that's really cool. Then there was another one which is about selling via video, live video on demand for salespeople, which gets really great results. So, and because we're in the middle of one of the biggest revolutions in business and entrepreneurship ever. We got the intersection of so many things that's just amplifying and accelerating change. So, and then throw a pandemic into the mix. And then we accelerate the change to how we work and live. Not all good, there's some bad, because there's loneliness, there's isolation if you're working on your own as versus working in an office. But yeah, I think shining a light on some of these entrepreneurs and discovering what they're doing, because a lot of these aren't heard of. We live in a global market as well, and that's what's exciting. is that
Yeah,
you're no longer selling cheese to the village square, right? You're selling it to the world, and that's what's really,
I
that's what,
agree. And oftentimes what's really exciting about digital entrepreneurs, SaaS engineers, is it brings out what I love about business, which is it's based in meritocracy. Like these are folks that have scrapped and worked hard and they've earned their success because they're doing something that people want,
yep,
you know and they're stories that don't get highlighted often. The celebrities that we love are just incredibly talented. Like, what are you going to do if you weren't born insanely beautiful? Well, good luck being an actor. Good luck being a singer. Like, yeah. How hard do you have to work at it? I'm just going to say this. How hard is acting? It's not that hard. You just have to be incredibly beautiful at this point. So those folks get all the attention and all the awards, and they get all the pats on the backs and all the attaboys. Meanwhile, the folks that are out here, really working hard on solutions that make people's lives better are just grinding away. But with podcasting, we get to really like hear those folks. We can't see them, which is probably better, because if they are beautiful, they'd be actors. I'm not saying that they're not beautiful. They probably are, but more of that internal beauty. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, yeah. Well, it's,
So we get to hear them. And I think that's what's really cool about podcasting too, also being kind of a long form medium, which is, folks that are solving problems, particularly complex problems, can't be unraveled with 3 minutes on a talk show. So
yeah.
the success and growth of podcasting, speaks to people's desire to actually want to hear meaningful conversations, which is really cool.
Yeah, and I just love bringing some value to the audience and going, okay, what were your struggles? How do you go over them? How did you identify a problem? How did you build it? How do you manage a team? And you know, and I certainly see entrepreneurs as artists. That's for me, is that they take an idea and turn it into something real that can be seen, um, virtually or in reality. And I just love that creative spirit that sits, underneath every entrepreneur. And entrepreneurs are creators, and
Yeah.
it is fascinating to hear their stories. And there's many ways for entrepreneurs to do things. They can sell something beautiful, or they can solve a problem. And so, yeah, my hat's off to the creators of this world, whether they're artists or whether they're entrepreneurs. It's and
Or their podcasts, Jeff. I
yeah,
mean, what you do is absolutely awesome, and it's a public service. And it's amazing. I think that it represents kind of like, if we're going back to Buddhist principles, it is right livelihood, where if the idea is to be helpful, can the first kind of thing to do is to not make anything worse. It's like, do no harm. And fortunately, like, just having conversations and like helping people find their voice, but also helping an audience like find inspiration, it doesn't hurt anything.
yeah,
And on a good day, it might be really helpful. So I know for me and in my career, I'm so happy to be in podcasting, and I couldn't do it without folks like you. So
yeah.
I really appreciate what you do.
Yeah, well, I'd do it for free. And the reality is that, I just, by shining a light on someone else and just listening, the world learns and I learn at the same time. And I just hear someone sharing their gift.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do. And this is a long game for me. Um, I, I started my blog in 2009. We're about 13 years in. We got up to 5 million views. We got bashed around by Google algorithm changes, and now Google algorithms changes are serving us. So it's about creating content that changes the world in a big way or a small way. It really doesn't matter. But yeah,
Yeah.
add value, solve problems, provide inspiration, and occasionally it provides some entertainment. So,
Nice. Yeah. I love it, man. What about, you think blogging will come back? I feel like blogging was taken from us. Like, everybody just, with web 2.0, they just kind of abandoned it. But
yeah,
that
look,
was,
Look, blogging sort of reached its peak in like 2011, 12. You go back to Google Trends. So I don't think it'll necessarily come back, but I think the art of writing for a digital world, I've been
Substack is obviously having a massive success, so there is a hunger for long form writing.
yeah. Well, I think there's also a hunger for uh, really, really get to the point writing as well. And
Yeah.
I noticed that Axios just sold to a traditional publisher for $525 million after starting 5 years ago. And they've got a formula which they've encapsulated in the term smart brevity.
Mm.
And it's because when I saw what they'd done in just 5 years, 6 years, I went, there's something. So I've dived into how they write and communicate, whether it's an email, whether it's a news release or internal, press release or external press release. But incredibly powerful new way of communicating with words. And
Mm.
they've basically created this out of data. So what's really fascinating is that in 2006-7, the way we communicated started to change. It's called the smartphone.
Yeah.
Then on top of that, add all the noise of social media and the World Wide Web with 6 billion people on it. How do you cut through with words? So, but yeah, I've started applying some of the principles, but we've done a lot of the principles. In other words, write simply, bold, bullet, catch people's attention,
Scannable.
yeah. But they
Yeah.
take it to a whole new level, and it's I just would recommend to either yourself and to my audience is that check out Smart Brevity by Axios. It is very, very cool and a great way of written communication. Okay, so in a world where everyone seems to watch videos, but a lot of us still read.
Yeah, well, and just studying rhetoric is like really what I'm interested in now, and persuasive language. I mean, it's something that was an original part of a liberal arts education that's completely been erased, probably because advertisers are like, we can't let them know the tricks we're using. but but I'm always interested in
Yeah.
like how can we communicate the most efficiently and effectively. I'll definitely check it out.
Yeah, go to their webpage. They've got about 6, 7 videos you can watch, which actually covers in short snippets how they do it. You can also do a course they can provide training for you. But um, I've been writing with bullet points and bolding and simple words for a long time, and but they take it to a whole new level, which is driven by data. So there
Yeah.
you go. Yep.
Cool. I love the recommendation.
Yeah. So anyway, so let's a little bit more on Wildcast. So how does Wildcast work? You're going to pivot to providing advertising for podcasts, guests, and hosts. So how does it work in essence initially? I know it's going to evolve over time. So how's Wildcast work? You mentioned to me before the show was like we allow people to do live pre-rolls, I suppose is the best way to describe it.
Yeah, or what they'll call host read ads is kind
Yep.
of what we're tackling first. So if if you're a podcast host, you can sign up on the platform and verify your account, and you'll be taken to an ad marketplace that will have basically ad read opportunities. But you're also going to get matched to brands coming in the front door based on relevance. We are going to absolutely lead the relevancy
Yep.
department because we have more than 50 or 60 criteria where we're matching the outcomes that the brands and agencies want with the attributes of the audience that the podcasts want. So as a brand or agency, you come in, you say, these are the outcomes we want. We want new clients. These are the attributes of the ideal audience. It'll be decision makers, they're director level. They work at SaaS companies. And with the push of a button, they'll be able to see their own Wildcast being created in front of their eyes, which would basically be their own podcast network. So there'd be 25 podcasts presented to them. They can say like, not this one, not that one. Those other two podcasts auto-populated. They look at these podcasts. They're like, this is great. They say go immediately. Then those podcasts receive an invitation to the campaign where they can take it or not. But hopefully the attributes do match well enough that they're going to be really excited that this brand wants to bring them into their Wildcast. So at that point, the podcast received the creative and has the pitch, if you will, like this podcast is brought to you by Notion. They do the read, they're able to validate the read in the platform and then get paid directly from the platform. So the idea is to make it as easy as possible to facilitate these advertising relationships that are the most relevant as it possibly could be between brand, host, and audience.
Right. So tell me if I'm wrong or right here. So originally, what you're trying to do is you're trying to remove the friction for podcasts to monetize and for guests to actually be on podcasts enabled by technology. So in other words, it's about scale and removing friction for both the podcast host and the podcast guest who wants to advertise. Is that correct?
Absolutely. We're trying to get podcast hosts paid, and we're also trying to get perfect advertising opportunities to the audiences that are most likely to convert, which are, they show kind of ownership and buying intent already by listening to the podcast.
All right, cool. And so you're doubling down on podcasting.
I know it's a podcasty world for me. It's, I do have another little side thing I'm doing with my son. He's 13 years old and he came up with a business idea. I was like, okay, let's go do this e-commerce thing. Cause I'm up to my eyeballs in podcasting.
So just to wrap it up, Ryan, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. What are some tips for entrepreneurs or people that want to start a side hustle? You mentioned before of the show, you sort of said that you've got your timing wrong a few times, and haven't we all, in terms of launching a new business or an idea that didn't quite work out. What's just a couple of tips that you'd like to leave with our audience in terms of, as an entrepreneur in a digital world, what would you like to offer in terms of a couple of top tips?
You bet. So a couple of things, particularly for new entrepreneurs or people that are balancing a side hustle and kind of getting ready to make a change. There's a very strict criteria I have to put on myself because I like to chase shiny things. And the fact of the matter is I got two teenagers and I don't have a lot of time. So the chase is going to have to be boiled down pretty quick. So I need an initial validation in order to know if I should prioritize it in my workflow. So there's three things for me. One is it of service? We kind of talked about the right livelihood. It's very important to me that I'm of service to people. Is it fun? Is the second. Yep. I know that me personally, if I'm not enjoying doing it, I'm just going to avoid doing it. That's it. So if it's fun for me to do it, then I'm be naturally up to it. And then the third, does it make money? Which is very important because I would be tying flies in my garage, getting ready for fly fishing season all day long. So I have to make sure that with my time, I'm allotting an appropriate amount of time to making money. And if it doesn't make money, I have to cut it. And when I say cut it, I mean, just like knock it down a couple rungs on my prioritization. So if you could, those three things work well for me, but I think for folks, if they have a way that they can quickly prioritize ideas, that'd be a great place to start. The second thing is where to put those priorities. I like to use a Trello board where moving from left to right, I have what I'm working on right now. On the hard left is going to be the projects that are getting my time. Now, my fly tying business that in my garage, I'm not saying that's a bad idea. It just might be way to the right because I cannot prioritize it at this moment. But having a place for ideas and not judging those ideas, but prioritizing them is really important because you might wake up and you're like, I have this new idea for XYZ. It's a new kind of shampoo bottle. And you don't want to, first, you can't tell your spouse that because they'll think you're crazy. Which isn't good for the creative process. But what I found is like nurturing that, which is to put it somewhere and not prioritize it until the time is right for that idea. Yeah. So I think that would be a good place to start, maybe some advice that I wish I would have had early on, which is learning, like, how do I quickly qualify an idea, and then how and where do I prioritize that idea to give it time in life?
Yeah, I love it. So the three tips are: number one, come up with an idea and validate it and give it some priority. Number two, do you enjoy it? And number three, does it make money? And I think that's pretty simple, but I'd say that works.
It's helpful.
It's helpful.
As time slips away, it's like, man, I better be careful not to waste it.
Exactly. Well, we're all getting older, and we've only got one life to live, so be very careful how you live it. In fact, take some time to design a life that works, and that's not a straight road, that is for sure. So there's going to be bumps on the way. But Ryan, thank you very much for sharing your stories. That's what we try to find you here, and sharing your insights and learnings and experience. It's been absolutely awesome. Thank you very much, and look forward to hearing more about Wildcast and seeing how it evolves on top of Kitcaster. So thank you very much, Ryan.
Thank you, Jeff. It was great to talk to you a little bit, and I love this conversation. We went all over the place. I'm glad we made it back. But thanks a lot, Jeff. Thank you for everything you do.
So welcome. It's nothing like a good fireside chat.
Indeed.
All that's missing is the beer and wine.
Oh, not so much. Hey.
Well, I've got tea, but gin comes later.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
You betcha.